Dreamforce 21 recap is kind of our presentation topic for today. Like Chuck mentioned, my name is Adam Olshansky. I'm a Salesforce engineer at Google. So I work on Salesforce developer for one of the many instances at Google of Salesforce. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Adam17AMO. And also check out my blog, adam2architect.com. I have a blog post about the Dreamforce 21 recap. Also some release note highlights, and then a few other things mixed in here and there as well. So I'm also a Salesforce MVP, 7-time Trailhead Ranger, 15 Salesforce certifications. I think this is my 8th Dreamforce, I want to say, this year, if you count last year's online one as well. And I was fortunate enough to be able to attend in person. And I'm really passionate about helping people grow with Salesforce, to learn and develop on the Salesforce platform. 8-time Rad Woman coach. I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the bio toward the end. I also had the pleasure of actually visiting your beautiful state this summer. I went to Oahu for almost a week. Checked out Waikiki, Honolulu, and a few other, actually all over the island I went to. So definitely a lot of fun. Would love to come back at some point. But until then, Mark Benioff was nice enough to bring a little bit of Hawaii to me in the Bay Area in the form of in-person Dreamforce. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So just at a high level, I'm going to be kind of going over some of the major announcements talked about during the keynote and some kind of themes for the 3 days, 2 of which were in person. Talk about kind of the highlights for admins, developers, architects, and then my favorite thing at Dreamforce is always saying what's on the roadmap, what is kind of coming to keep me excited moving forward. All right, so let's start with some of the major announcements, both from the main keynote that kicked things off and some of the themes that I saw throughout the week. The first one, in case you had not heard, you definitely heard after attending or watching anything at Dreamforce, Salesforce acquired Slack in the last year. And Slack is definitely front and center at Dreamforce this year. Salesforce is kind of branding it as the digital HQ, and they made some anecdotes that they were starting Salesforce today. Would they still get an apartment in San Francisco and start it, or would they just start it from their own homes with kind of a digital headquarters of Slack? And so they showed us some demos about how Slack works. If you're unfamiliar with Slack, it is a messaging service similar to Discord. If any of you are active gamers and use Discord. Basically, there's a bunch of different users in your kind of Slack community. You can break it off into different channels that are either topic-based, project-based, and have kind of subsets of your user base. You can also have direct messages with people and really kind of connect everyone, messaging people quickly. I personally like using it better than email, especially for quick messages. A couple of things they announced at Dreamforce, a new feature that you may or may not be aware of. I was not aware, something called huddles, which are basically kind of just impromptu meetings. Everyone's chatting back and forth. It's called huddle together real quick and have a 5-minute chat about something. You can do that in Slack now. You can also, I guess, bring in people from outside your company. So usually, your Slack would be kind of for the people in your company, but you can have external users, similar to how you would with like a chatter group with external users. The other thing they're releasing now is something called clips, which are basically kind of like voicemail messages, right? If I have a half-hour-long presentation, that's great if people are able to attend. But if someone's not able to attend, I just want to leave a little voice memo for someone, I can do a quick 30-second recording and post it into a Slack clip and share that with people as well. In terms of connecting with Salesforce, another big theme, we're going to talk about kind of bringing everything together. Slack has a bunch of integrations with Salesforce already. There's an apps feature in Slack where you can kind of connect Slack to a bunch of different things, one of which being Salesforce. And so are there connections that are existing in Flow. So I can have a flow that will kind of, post a message in Slack. I can have an approval process where if I add a reaction in Slack, it'll approve the record in Salesforce. And something that was announced at Dreamforce is something called Foyer. Maybe later will be changed to be pronounced Foyer, but they said it was pronounced Foyer, which is basically you can write Slack actions in Apex. So kind of a cool idea as well. Again, kind of trying to bring everything together. And Salesforce, I think, has really embraced the notion that not everything is going to be on Salesforce. And I think that's been a big step forward for them at recognizing there are a bunch of different applications in people's ecosystems. Slack is a great way to connect Salesforce, yes, but also a bunch of other people together and other systems as well. And so definitely front and center. They had a big Slack booth in the middle of Dreamforce. I got a free pair of Slack socks, which was nice. But definitely Slack was mentioned in almost every session in some form or another at Dreamforce. The other big announcement, so Salesforce, I feel like changes their diagram every year with kind of how the platform is meant to be architected. And this year was no different. So now Slack is kind of the top layer. You have all the customer 360 Salesforce clouds in the middle. You have Einstein mixed in there doing all the AI. And now they have a new bottom layer, something called Hyperforce, which I think they announced a little while ago, but really emphasized at Dreamforce as well. And this is the notion that Salesforce is moving the back end of Salesforce from their own servers to the public cloud. So basically they're moving Salesforce onto AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. I think they have some partnerships in Asia with Alibaba as well. And I think for the most part, this is happening in Australia and India as of now, but they have a couple different products, I think like Health Cloud and Vaccine Cloud in the US and a few other places as well. But my understanding is the goal is eventually they want to move everything onto the public cloud. And theoretically, this will give Salesforce more kind of elastic capabilities, maybe scale up, scale down, kind of like Heroku does. Maybe some performance improvements down the road, maybe some relaxing governor limits, all kind of speculation on my part, but definitely a big engineering initiative for them, moving everything onto the public cloud. So that was mentioned as well, and something I'm guessing we'll hear more about moving forward. Right, and the other kind of major announcement was if you attended Dreamforce, you probably attended it on the new Salesforce streaming service, because everyone wants another streaming service, right? That is Salesforce Plus, kind of branded as the streaming service for business. And there are definitely some things I liked about it. You know, in the past, if you attended Dreamforce, it was impossible to be in two places at once. You can't possibly attend every session. And, you know, Dreamforce, you're learning a lot during the week. And then 6 weeks later, you get a message, oh, hey, sessions are on YouTube now, or sessions are on some other service now. And by that point, right, I'm in the middle of something else. I don't necessarily have time to go back and watch everything. And it gets added to the to-do list and you never really get around to it. But this year, everything was available on Salesforce Plus right away. So I missed one of the keynotes. I missed part of a session. I missed some sessions, just being in person. Some sessions were online only. I could just go home at night and watch the sessions on Salesforce Plus. And, you know, it was put together very quickly. And I think there are some features they're still working on. But they definitely have big plans for the service. And so I like the idea of conference sessions being available immediately. They got a bunch of full series they're working on. Some are already out. There's one, I forgot the name of it, Innovative Growth or something like that. But they've interviews with different CEOs. I saw the Google CEO was in one of them, where they're kind of sharing best practices, tips on professional growth, building business skills. And they're going to have kind of some of these inspirational stories of people who have, you know, grown their careers with Salesforce, things like that. I know they have a bunch of plans for some other series that they're putting on there as well. So definitely recommend checking it out. I think it'll be nice to have hopefully a single place where all the content is. Right now, if I want to watch a webinar, I have to hope I have a link in an email somewhere or Google for it, or maybe get it from somebody else. But theoretically now, you know, all the Trailhead Lives and all the different webinars that they have that are interesting, I'll be able to find them all on Salesforce Plus. All right, and then other themes. So one of the people they introduced, I think he's been around a few months now, was the Chief Product Officer, David Schmer. For me, when I think about, you know, Salesforce for admins, I always tell people, even as a developer or an architect, you really need to understand the admin side of the platform, right? You need to understand how Salesforce security works. You need to know the capabilities of Salesforce automation. And you may have heard about this in a Salesforce Live they did a couple weeks ago, but there are some major changes coming to automation. And namely that workflow and process builder are going away. And the rationale behind this that they talked about was in the name of kind of ease of use improvements, right? They were talking about how, you know, for example, with data loading, there are a bunch of different ways to do various tasks in Salesforce. And a lot of them are maybe subpar. They have, you know, limitations. It's always, you know, you have data loader, you have dataloader.io, you have the import wizard, you have Workbench, and they all have different like limits. They all have different objects they can work with. For more than this number of records, use this. For more than this number of records, use do a task instead of a bunch of okay ways to do a task. And so when it comes to automation, flow is going to be the way. And if you've been following along with the release notes, you've seen all the new features that have been added to flow in the last even just year or two. Right now, you can do record trigger flows before or after records are saved. With Winter 22, they added things like batching. They added asynchronous capabilities. They added outbound messaging capabilities you could previously only do with workflow. And so they're really making flow a lot more code-like, but they're also really making it so that there's not necessarily a reason to create a new workflow or process builder. And so they mentioned that, when they retire anything, there's kind of a long timeline ahead. All of these dates they shared are, safe harbor, forward-looking, et cetera. But the idea is that for all new automation, they recommend using Flow. In spring 22, so the next release in, I think probably February, they're planning on having a workflow rule to Flow migration tool. The release after that in summer 22, so probably June or so, they're going to have a process builder to Flow migration tool. And the idea is that about a year from now, next October in Winter 23, just like if you create a new org now, it's going to be Lightning only. You're not going to be able to create new workflows and process builders. They did not share any information about if workflows and processes will stop working altogether. I'm pretty sure some orgs are still using ActiveS controls, for example, and that technology has been more or less retired for a while. But I'm guessing they will phase out support for some of these things. So with spring coming up, think about doing your best Marie Kondo impression and figuring out, does all this automation really need to be there? Maybe some of it doesn't spark joy and can be retired as well. For any new automation, I would recommend going with flows. And for any existing automation, think about how to consolidate, think about how to maybe rebuild it, and maybe see what those migration tools look like when they come out. I know flows, definitely something I need to do some more reading up on. With triggers and process builder, we have this idea of one per object, one process per object, one trigger per object. And flows, I think it's a little bit different. I think it's more one flow per task or per business process. And so we have to think about it in a little bit of a different way. But definitely something to keep in mind, that workflows and process builder are officially being phased out. And I think on the admin.salesforce.com website, they just launched a blog post with this information as well, in case you need to cite some proof as to why you are trying to build a flow instead of a workflow. So that was the biggest thing I think for admins. Another thing that was kind of under the radar, I didn't see any announcements at Dreamforce. I saw an article and I saw it mentioned in one of the keynotes. But Salesforce now has a backup and restore service native to the platform. So I think this is something people have been asking for a while. Previously, if you deleted data, you had to either hope it was in the recycle bin, you had to get an ISV partner, or you had to pay Salesforce a lot of money to restore it. And that is not going to be the case anymore. So Salesforce is going to allow for daily backups of standard and custom objects, along with files and attachments. And they're going to let you restore down to the object, the day, the hour, the minute that you want to bring back records for. And it's going to look something like these screenshots on the screen here. I'm not sure. I don't recall seeing anything about it in the winter release notes. They said it would be available October 2021. So it potentially will be coming to an org near you very soon. Okay, so with this idea of flows, I mentioned there's kind of this notion of one maybe business process per flow. Flows are going to get very complex very quickly, and there's probably going to be a lot of them. And so Salesforce talked about this tool. I think this was actually mentioned at TDX as well, but they demoed it a little bit more at Dreamforce, called Flow Orchestrator. And so this idea basically to control all your flows, it's going to be multi-user, multi-step, multi-stage. So you can update different things for different users. You can have different steps. You can order things around. You can have different stages you send things to. And this can be done for reusable processes, right? You can have the same process in two different parts of your flow. You can have approvals routed through here. It's more or less a way to code without writing the code. The service, at least in the Winter 22 release notes, was listed as in beta. And my understanding is that there will be some sort of pricing along with this. So it remains to be seen how useful it'll be for the larger audience. But something to keep in mind if you're having some trouble kind of managing and figuring out how all the flows fit together, something to look into down the road as well. Or even right now while it's in beta. All right, so that was kind of the big updates I saw for admins. Let's talk a little bit about developers. And so, for me, I'm primarily a Salesforce developer, and there was a feature they mentioned 2 or 3 Dreamforces ago now that I was really excited about called Evergreen. And that feature is finally live now. It has been rebranded Salesforce Functions, but it is a way to write non-Salesforce code in Salesforce. So these are Java, Node.js, and TypeScript blocks of code that you can put in Salesforce. And they have a recipe repo to get started with some examples. And the notion is you can stay on the platform, work with some more elastic scale, and potentially expand the talent pool. So if you know someone who's a Java developer, now they can write Java in Salesforce. Me as a Salesforce developer, maybe I don't get a lot of Java experience, I can write some Java and keep up my Java skills. And the examples they gave, things like processing a large data set. Maybe it'll time out and run into some limits in Apex. Maybe if you run it in Java, it's going to be a little bit easier to handle. So I've not yet played around with it myself, but I'm excited to get started with it. So there's a link here if you want the recipes repo. You can also Google Salesforce function recipes. But definitely very excited to see that. And I believe that is GA with Winter 22. So there's going to be a new folder in your code directory called functions, and you're going to be able to create new functions. And at least for now, these 3 languages, I hope they will add support for more at some point. But Java, Node, and TypeScript for now. All right, the next big thing for developers wasn't as impactful to me because I primarily just use the Salesforce CLI. But if you're using Heroku or MuleSoft or Commerce Cloud or Tableau, you have one CLI for each of them. Having one way to do everything or one way to do certain things, Salesforce is consolidating all that. And so they're turning 6 different CLIs into one CLI. And it's going to be a new executable called SF. It's going to work for all of these CLIs. Everything's going to be backwards compatible, so scripts are not going to break. And the kind of idea behind it is that they want to make the CLIs easier to use. So instead of having to remember all these different flags and attributes of a command, they're going to have interactive prompts, and they're going to make the commands a lot simpler. So as in a couple of examples, previously, if I wanted to deploy something, I had to remember sfdx for source deploy. And now I just put sf deploy. And you can see in the screenshot here, it'll ask me, okay, what do you want to deploy? Where do you want to deploy it? And have prompts that will kind of guide you through it. Same thing if I want to retrieve something. Previously, I had to remember sfdx for source retrieve. Now it'll just be sf retrieve metadata and have some prompts there as well. And so this, I have been told, have not confirmed, but I've been told it's available with the latest CLI update, the SFDX CLI update 7.120. So you might be able to start using this today. But excited to see things get a little bit simpler, maybe lower the barrier to entry for new developers. And if anybody was using 6 different CLIs, I like the idea that now they only have to worry about one CLI that they can do everything with. Right, a little bit lower key of an announcement, but the Salesforce developers has finally been brought into 2021 with a brand new website. There's a bunch of good API documentation on there. I think that's kind of lacking before. So I recommend checking that out. Definitely looks a lot nicer. I think it's running on the Lightning Web runtime, so the new environment to create Experience Cloud sites. So definitely kind of refreshing to see. And then long need of an update. And then the other thing that Salesforce shared was some of these crazy statistics about how much people are developing on the Salesforce platform. Right, 5 billion Apex executions every day. That's kind of crazy. So just kind of keeping in mind how much Salesforce is used all over the world. But I thought there were kind of some cool statistics that they shared there as well. So that is Salesforce developers. Let's go on to Salesforce for architects. So Salesforce architects, I think, have definitely gotten a lot more popular in the last couple of years. For a while, they were kind of the forgotten child, right? We had them come out with all these new certifications to help guide people toward the CTA path. And then we had a kind of architect Twitter handle and an architect team that's been growing. Now we have an architect mascot, Ruth, and she definitely made herself known at Dreamforce. So they gave all the in-person attendees one of these Ruth plushies here with a giant Ruth that was dancing on stage with the Foo Fighters. So architects were definitely very front and center at Dreamforce as well. And that included the very first ever Dreamforce architect keynote. And they made a couple announcements at the keynote. The biggest, or one of the biggest, I guess I would say, is this integration with Lucidchart. So I use Lucidchart to help create diagrams. And now I can use all the different Salesforce product icons and templates in Lucidchart directly. So I don't have to be copying and pasting and screenshotting actual Salesforce as much. I can just drag them all in directly from Lucidchart. So definitely excited to see, hope to see more partnerships like this with various different libraries and outside tools. I think especially with architecture, Salesforce is realizing, everything's not just Salesforce. There's so many other things involved. And so it's great that they're partnering with various companies like Lucidchart to be able to create better diagrams and improve the experience for architects in general. Just like the developers, Salesforce architects also have a new website. So architect.salesforce.com. And there's a ton of resources they put on there. So they got a bunch of different templates to create diagrams. They have all the data models on there. So if you're trying to explain to someone what is everything in Sales Cloud, they have a good Sales Cloud diagram with all the objects and how they all connect. And then they also have, recommendations about different operating models. They talk about the Salesforce operating model. And again, a bunch of different templates, some diagram instructions, different ways to do notation, things like that. So a lot of great resources on there. So the next time you need to make a diagram of some kind, definitely recommend checking out the website. And you might find some resources you can use on there. So that's great. What about the roadmap? What is Salesforce kind of working on? What's coming in the next year or so? And again, for the roadmap, I'm going to kind of divide it into admin, developer, and architect. So for admins, and most of this, if you want demos of any of these roadmap features, there is a session on Salesforce Plus in the IT section. I think I want to say session 3. It's called like the IT Leaders Guide to the Salesforce Platform or something like that. But they demoed all of these features. And so for admins, they talked about multi-object pages. So this is the notion that I can go into App Builder and I can create a new page and I can drag fields from different objects onto the same page. So I don't remember the example they used, but for example, I can have, contact fields and account fields all on the same page without needing any code. And that's going to be piloted in summer 22. Next thing they talked about was the idea of admin filterable related lists. And so this is the idea that I can go into, again, an app builder page. I can drag, I can have a record page for account, and I can drag in a related list for cases. And I can filter it and say, okay, this related list should only be open cases under the account. And I can drag another related list onto the page, make it be cases, and have it be the closed cases on the account. So again, being able to bring in multiple related lists off the same lookup relationship without needing any code. And that's supposed to be GA summer 22. Last thing they talked about was App Builder for Slack. And this is basically a modal for Salesforce data from Slack. So with an App Builder, I can design this modal and I can, have this form that you can input some information from a Slack command and it'll create a Salesforce record. And so that's going to be GA in the next release. It looks like spring of 22. Some other things they talked about, integrating a flow orchestrator with Slack in spring of 22. And they also talked about Einstein document reader that is in pilot now. And the Einstein document reader, basically you can upload a PDF. It'll be able to read the PDF and map all of the data into different fields on an object. So kind of a cool concept. I imagine both of those last two will come with some additional pricing. But my understanding of the first three will not. I'm excited to see what they're working on. Even though I don't necessarily use too many of the Einstein things, I always like seeing what they are, knowing that they're out there. They can potentially come in handy at some point. Right, on the developer roadmap, most of the things they talked about are already released, the Salesforce functions, CLI unification. The biggest thing, though, is kind of the much needed replacement to the developer console. And so Salesforce is launching something called Code Builder, which is going to be in beta in spring of 22. And it is basically an in-browser version of Visual Studio, complete with the Salesforce extension pack. So basically just think, okay, if I wanted to work directly in Visual Studio in a browser without having to install anything, without having to keep it up to date myself, you'll be able to do that with the Code Builder. And so potentially a little bit of a lower barrier to entry for new developers. They don't need to figure out how to install VS Code. They don't need to figure out how to install all the extensions and set up all their Java frameworks and things like that. So excited to see what that brings. For me, I primarily use the dev console these days just to go through debug logs. It's a little bit easier than doing it in VS Code. But I know there's some SOQL capabilities, I think, in VS Code too, that I need to look into a little bit more, because I usually just do dev console for that too, because it's a little bit quicker. But I know VS Code can do it too. So we'll see if they're going to be adding any additional things or bringing some stuff over from dev console. I'm not sure if dev console is going to go away completely. They didn't mention anything about that. But this is kind of the next iteration of the Salesforce native developer console. All right, and then the roadmap for the platform. So I talked about backup and restore. The biggest thing really is this new thing they're working on called the DevOps Center. And they branded this as being able to say goodbye to change sets. So it's basically bringing your change management, a better version of change management, to Salesforce. And so the idea is you're going to be able to walk through your whole Salesforce or software development lifecycle directly in Salesforce. So instead of using change sets, you're going to be able to hook up to something like GitHub. You're going to be able to see what files have changed. You're going to be able to push to GitHub. It'll create a branch. You'll be able to pull from GitHub, deploy it to another org. I don't know if other repositories are going to work right now. They mentioned GitHub repeatedly. Presumably, it'll work with some of the others as well. I hope so, at least. But the plan is for that to be GA in spring of 22. So definitely excited to see what comes of that. I'm also very excited to not have to use change sets anymore. So looking forward to that. And the other things they mentioned are some things around privacy. So there's going to be some additional privacy analytics you can get about things like how often are people filling out your forms. About I think privacy analytics actually was the one where it works kind of similar to web to case, where you can generate kind of a block of code that you can embed in a page, and it'll capture consent and cookie information and things like that. And then the preference center, you can kind of control some of those preferences, how often you want to remind people to accept your cookies and things like that. And then analytics, you'll also be able to track how often are people accepting, what information are they giving you, things like that. So there are some new apps that are coming with some of those capabilities in spring 22 as well. All right, and so that is my my Dreamforce recap. Again, feel free to connect with me on Twitter, check out my blog. Happy to take any questions about Dreamforce and anything else you may have.
Well, from Yuko and myself, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.